The words came out of my son-in-law's mouth so casually, so effortlessly, as if he were commenting on the weather. I had just set a plate of fresh-baked lemon cookies on the kitchen table when Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said, "Dorothy, honestly, a woman your age, living alone in a 4-bedroom house, is just irresponsible. You should sign the property over to us now and move into Sunrise Gardens. They have bingo on Thursdays." I stood there with the oven mitt still on my hand, looking at the man my daughter had married 6 years ago, and I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. "Bingo on Thursdays," I repeated. "And a heated pool," he added, as if that were the detail that would make me pack my bags. My daughter Claire sat across from him, studying the pattern on the tablecloth like it was the most fascinating thing she had ever seen. She didn't look up. She didn't say a single word in my defense. That kitchen table had been in my home for 31 years. My late husband Richard had built it from reclaimed oak the summer before Claire was born. I had sat at it to nurse her through fevers, to help her with algebra homework, to cry after Richard's funeral. And now my son-in-law was sitting at it, eating my cookies, suggesting I trade my life for bingo and a heated pool. I took the oven mitt off very slowly. "I'll think about it," I said, because I had learned over the years that those 3 words bought time while giving nothing away. What I did not tell Marcus that afternoon was that I had already started thinking about a great many things. I am 67 years old. I taught high school English for 34 years in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have read every manipulative narrative device ever invented because I taught them to teenagers who tried to use them on me every semester for 3 decades. I know a setup when I see one. The truth about Marcus and Claire's financial situation was something I had been quietly watching for nearly 4 years. It had started small, the way these things always do. A loan of $2,000 when Marcus's car needed repairs. A loan he paid back in 6 months, which made me feel good about giving it. Then another loan, this time for Claire's dental work, and then one more for the deposit on their new apartment when they decided Raleigh was too crowded and moved to Charlotte. Each request came wrapped in warmth and gratitude. Each time, I told myself this was what family did. By the time I actually sat down and added up every transfer, every check, every cash envelope slipped across this very oak table, the number was $43,000 over 4 years. Not a single cent had ever been called a loan after that first $2,000. They had simply stopped using that word, and I had stopped demanding it. I had paid that money from my teacher's pension, from the savings Richard and I had spent 20 years building, from the life insurance payout I had always planned to use for myself. I had stopped replacing the hot water heater that rattled every morning. I had not taken a vacation in 3 years. I had reworn the same winter coat for 5 seasons because a new one felt like an indulgence when Claire and Marcus needed help with their lease renewal. And now Marcus wanted the house. That evening after they left, I sat at Richard's table, and I did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I made a list, not of my feelings, but of facts. Column 1, what I had given. Column 2, what I had received in return. The first column filled 3 pages. The second column had 1 entry. A Mother's Day card signed by Claire with a printed message and no personal note, postmarked 2 days after the actual holiday. I slept badly that night, but not because I was sad. I was angry, and anger at least has the courtesy of keeping you alert. The next morning I drove to see Ruth, my neighbor and the closest thing I had to a best friend since Richard died. Ruth was 72 and had outlasted 2 husbands and 1 business partner, all of whom had underestimated her. She listened to me over coffee without interrupting, which is rarer than people think. When I finished, she set her cup down and said, "What are you going to do?" "First," I said, "I'm going to call my bank." Mr. Calloway had managed my accounts at First Regional for 11 years. He greeted me that morning with genuine warmth, not the performed warmth of someone who needs something from you. I explained that I wanted to review every transfer made in the last 4 years, and that I wanted to add a flag to my account, requiring my verbal confirmation for any changes going forward. He processed everything without drama, and when I stood to leave, he said quietly, "Mrs. Dorothy, I want you to know this isn't the first time I've had this conversation with a customer. It usually means something has shifted." "Something has," I said. I did not tell Claire or Marcus what I had done. The next few weeks were quiet on their end, which I recognized as the calm before something. Marcus had planted his seed. He was waiting to see if it would grow. It grew in an unexpected direction. 3 weeks after the bingo conversation, my phone rang on a Sunday morning. It was Claire, and her voice had the careful, practiced tone I recognized from when she was 16 and had done something she knew I wouldn't like. "Mom, Marcus and I have been talking. We think it would really make sense for you to give us power of attorney over your finances, just so that if anything ever happened to you, there wouldn't be all that legal confusion." I sat very still. "What kind of confusion are you expecting, Claire?" "Nothing specific. It's just practical. You're not getting any younger, and it would give us peace of mind." There it was, peace of mind, as if my bank account existed to provide them peace of mind. "I'll look into it," I said. "Marcus knows an attorney who could have the paperwork ready by next week. It would be very simple. An attorney Marcus had already sourced. Paperwork already in preparation. A timeline that had nothing to do with my convenience." "I'll look into it," I said again, and I hung up. I called my own attorney that afternoon. Patricia Webb had handled Richard's estate and had known me long enough to speak plainly. I told her everything, from the 4-year financial history to Marcus's property suggestion to the power of attorney request that had arrived, conveniently, via my daughter rather than him. "Dorothy," Patricia said, "what you're describing has a formal name. It's called elder financial abuse, and it doesn't require strangers. Family members are the most common perpetrators." The word abuse sat in my stomach like a stone. I was not the kind of woman who used that word lightly, but Patricia walked me through the pattern so methodically that by the end of the call, I could not argue with the shape of it. We spent 2 hours documenting everything. Every transfer, dated and sourced. Every request, the ones I remembered clearly and the ones I reconstructed from my own bank statements. Every conversation I could recall with enough detail to write down. Patricia's paralegal typed while I talked. "Here's what I want you to do," Patricia said at the end. "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Do not tell them what you've told me. Can you do that?" "I taught teenagers for 34 years, I said. "I can absolutely do that." The call I had been waiting for came on a Wednesday evening. It was Marcus this time, not Claire, which told me they had decided a direct approach was needed. His voice was the careful, measured tone of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say. "Dorothy, I want to be honest with you. We're concerned. Claire has noticed that you've seemed confused lately, forgetting things, making decisions that aren't like you. We think maybe you should see someone." "What decisions?" I asked. "Well, you've been pulling away from us, not returning calls as quickly, being short with Claire. It worries us." I had not been returning calls quickly because Patricia had advised me to create distance while documentation was being prepared. Marcus had interpreted strategy as symptom, which was either naive or calculated. With Marcus, I had learned never to assume naivety. "I feel perfectly fine," I said. "That's actually one of the signs, Dorothy. When someone's judgment is declining, they're often the last to recognize it." I pressed the phone against my ear and looked out the window at Richard's rose bushes that I had kept alive for 11 years on my own. I thought about 34 years of teenagers who had tried variations of this exact argument on me. "You don't understand. You're being unreasonable. You're the problem here." "Thank you for your concern, Marcus," I said. "Good night." The next morning, I made an appointment with my primary care physician, Dr. Anand. I did not wait for Marcus to arrange one with someone of his choosing. I walked into that office on my own 2 feet, answered every cognitive assessment question correctly, and left with a signed letter confirming that I was in excellent mental and physical health for my age, with no indicators of cognitive decline whatsoever. Patricia had suggested it. I had agreed without hesitation. If Marcus wanted to question my mind, I would put my mind in writing. What happened next told me exactly how serious they were. Ruth called me on a Friday afternoon, her voice tight in the way that meant she was trying not to alarm me. "There's a car parked across from your house, Dorothy. It's been there since this morning, and I recognize the passenger. It's Claire." I walked to my front window and confirmed it. Claire's silver sedan, engine off, parked half a block down, watching my house. I called Patricia. "Document it," she said immediately. "Time, date, description of vehicle. Do you have an outdoor camera?" I did not. But by end of day Saturday, I did. My handyman James installed 2 of them, front and back. I paid for the best model he had in his truck. When Claire saw the cameras the next time she drove by, she stopped parking on my street. 2 weeks passed, then 3. I had begun to believe they might be reconsidering when I opened my front door on a Tuesday morning to find a man I had never seen standing on my porch with a briefcase and a sympathetic expression. "Mrs. Whitfield? I'm Gerald Pruitt, an attorney. I've been asked by your family to conduct a capacity assessment. They've expressed significant concerns about your ability to make sound financial decisions." I looked at him for a long moment. He had the polished confidence of someone who had delivered this speech before and found it usually worked on the first try. "Mr. Pruitt," I said, "you are on my private property without an invitation. You are not my attorney, and you have no legal standing to conduct any assessment of any kind without my consent or a court order. Which one do you have?" He opened his mouth. "If the answer is neither," I said, "then I suggest you step off my porch." He stepped off my porch. I called Patricia before I had even closed the door. She had already anticipated this step and had prepared a formal letter to be sent to any attorney working on behalf of Marcus and Claire, making clear that I was legally represented and that any further contact must go through her office. It went out that afternoon. What I did not expect was the direction they chose next. Claire came alone. No Marcus, no hired attorney, just my daughter sitting in her car in my driveway on a Thursday morning with red eyes and a tissue in her hand. I watched her through the camera on my phone for several minutes before I opened the door. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from watching your child cry and having to calculate whether the tears are real. I let her in. I am her mother. Some things override strategy. She sat at Richard's table, and she looked smaller than I had seen her look in years. For a moment, she was 9 years old again, and I had to remind myself of the silver sedan parked down the street, of Marcus's attorney on my porch, of $43,000. "Mom," she said, "I'm scared." "What are you scared of, Claire?" "Marcus." She said it so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "He's different than I thought he was. He talks about your house like it's already ours. He's been calling it an investment. He has spreadsheets, Mom. He has spreadsheets with your assets listed on them." I sat down across from her, and I looked at my daughter's face, trying to find the lie in it. I had taught literature long enough to understand that people can be simultaneously sincere and dangerous, that Claire could genuinely be frightened of her husband and still, willingly or not, be part of what he was doing. "Have you seen these spreadsheets?" I asked. "I found them on his laptop last month. That's when I realized." She pressed the tissue against her eyes. "I thought he just wanted to help you. He always said he was helping you plan. I didn't know he had documents with your account numbers." My blood went cold. "He has my account numbers?" "He had them. I don't know where he got them." "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner." I was ashamed. I sat with this for a long moment. Then I asked the question I had been carrying for 6 years. "Did you know about the money, Claire?" "All of it." "Did you know how much?" She looked at the table. "I knew we borrowed a lot. $43,000 is not a lot. It's a life. It's your father's life insurance. It's my hot water heater and my winter coat and the trip to Yellowstone I never took, because every time I had a little extra, Marcus had a new emergency." She started to cry in earnest then. I did not go to her. I wanted to. The instinct to comfort my child is older than every lesson I have ever learned about self-preservation. But I stayed in my chair. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "I need you to tell Patricia Webb everything you just told me. Everything about those spreadsheets. Every account number you saw. Every conversation you remember Marcus having about my property or my finances. Can you do that?" She nodded. "And Claire," I said, "I need you to understand that what I'm going to do next is not about hurting you. But I will not sacrifice myself to protect a marriage that has been using me as a financial strategy." Patricia met with Claire the following afternoon. What Claire told her was more detailed than I had expected. Marcus had been researching my property value for at least 2 years. He had made inquiries with a real estate attorney about the process for transferring a parent's property during their lifetime without a sale. He had spoken with a financial planner, using my assets as the basis for a retirement plan that had no line item for me. And he had, in fact, obtained my bank account numbers from a statement he had photographed during a holiday visit when I left him alone in my office for 20 minutes to help Claire with the coffee. That last detail hit me like cold water. 20 minutes. I had been standing in my own kitchen, pouring coffee for my daughter, while my son-in-law was in my office photographing my financial statements. Patricia filed for a restraining order that week. The judge granted a temporary one within 48 hours, based on the documented evidence of unauthorized access to my financial information. The attorney sent to my home without my consent, and the formal paper trail of $43,000 in outgoing transfers corroborated by 4 years of bank records. Marcus's response was to escalate. He filed a petition for guardianship 3 days later. Patricia called me at 7 in the morning to tell me, and her voice was the voice of someone delivering news they have rehearsed. "He's claiming cognitive decline," she said. "He has a psychiatrist willing to testify. He also has a declaration from your neighbor, a Mr. Hatfield, Earl Hatfield, the man on my left, who had complained for 11 years that my oak tree dropped leaves into his gutters. I had baked that man 3 Christmas fruitcakes, trying to be a good neighbor, and he had signed a declaration against me." "What did Earl say?" I asked. "That he observed you having an agitated conversation in your driveway with individuals he didn't recognize. That you installed security cameras suddenly and without explanation. That you seemed to be isolating yourself from your family. He had watched me defend my own property from an unauthorized attorney and interpreted it as instability. He had seen cameras designed to protect me and called them paranoia. He had noticed that Claire and Marcus were no longer coming around and concluded I was the problem." "Patricia," I said, "what do we do?" "We fight," she said, "and we win." The 6 weeks between the filing and the hearing were the longest of my life, and also, strangely, some of the most clarifying. Ruth organized what she called a kitchen cabinet of women from our neighborhood association and her church who had known me for years, several of whom had their own stories about adult children and money that I had never heard before, because we do not talk about these things, because we are ashamed, because we believe it means we failed somehow. Barbara had been pressured to co-sign a business loan for her son that defaulted and cost her her savings. Irene's daughter had moved back home with 3 children and a husband who never worked, and Irene had spent 4 years trying to ask them to leave without destroying her relationship with her grandchildren. Donna had changed her will 3 times at the urging of a son-in-law who knew her estate attorney socially. We sat in Ruth's living room, and we talked, and I realized that what had happened to me was not a personal failure. It was a pattern as old as family and money existing in the same room together. Dr. Anand submitted a comprehensive medical report to the court. Patricia engaged an independent neuropsychologist, Dr. Sarah Okafor, who spent 4 hours with me over 2 sessions running every cognitive assessment in her professional toolkit. When her report came back, it said that my cognitive function tested in the 91st percentile for my age group, that I showed no indicators of impairment in memory, executive function, or financial reasoning, and that my decision to withdraw financial support from family members who had exhibited exploitative behavior was, in her professional opinion, a rational and self-protective response consistent with full mental competence. I read that report 3 times. I am not ashamed to say that I cried on the 3rd reading. The morning of the hearing, I wore the navy blazer I had bought for Richard's retirement party 20 years ago and had preserved carefully ever since. I drove myself to the courthouse. Patricia met me on the steps. Inside, Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table in a suit I did not recognize, which told me he had bought it for this occasion. He did not look at me when I entered the room. Claire sat beside him. She had asked Patricia if she could sit on my side of the courtroom, and Patricia had advised against it for logistical reasons, but I had seen the question for what it was. Marcus's attorney gave an opening statement that was technically polished and emotionally manipulative in equal measure. Dorothy Whitfield had exhibited sudden and dramatic personality changes. She had cut off her devoted family without explanation. She had installed surveillance equipment suggesting paranoid ideation. She had refused voluntary mental health evaluation, which they characterized as further evidence of impaired judgment. Patricia's opening statement was 45 seconds long. She said, "Your Honor, the petitioner is asking this court to declare a retired educator with 34 years of professional service and a clean financial record legally incompetent. The evidence will show that Mrs. Whitfield made one decision her son-in-law found inconvenient. She stopped giving him money. Everything that followed was his attempt to regain access to it. Marcus's psychiatrist testified first. He was a compact man, with careful language, who said that based on information provided by the family and my refusal to submit to evaluation, he had concerns about my judgment and self-awareness. Patricia cross-examined him for 12 minutes. By the end, he had confirmed that he had never met me, that his conclusions were based entirely on information provided by Marcus, that he had not reviewed my medical records, and that my refusal to be evaluated by a psychiatrist hired by a party hostile to my interests was, in his own words, upon reflection, a reasonable response in the circumstances. Earl Hatfield testified. He described everything he had seen from his front window over the past 2 months: the camera installation, the argument in the driveway, the absence of family visitors. Patricia asked him whether he had ever had a personal conversation with me about any of these observations. He said no. She asked whether he was aware that the individuals I had been speaking to in my driveway had arrived uninvited and had subsequently been found to be in violation of a restraining order. He said he had not been aware of that. Marcus testified. He spoke about his concern for me with the earnestness of a man who has practiced his concern in front of a mirror. He described how I had changed, how I had become unreachable, how my decision to withdraw financial support had come without warning and without reason. Patricia let him finish. Then she asked him to confirm the dollar amount I had transferred to him and Claire over 4 years. He said he wasn't sure of the exact figure. She presented the documented bank records. He said it had been a difficult time for them financially. She asked whether any of those transfers had been documented as loans. He said they were family gifts. She asked whether a woman who gives family gifts for 4 years and then stops is exhibiting irrational behavior or simply changing her mind. He did not have a good answer. She asked whether he was aware that photographing someone's financial documents without their knowledge was a potential criminal offense in the state of North Carolina. He said he had only done it to help me organize my affairs. She asked whether he had informed me he was doing this. He said he had not. She asked whether he had my permission. He said he assumed he had general permission as family. She said that was not the same thing, and she moved on before he could respond. When Patricia presented Dr. Okafor's report, she read the key passages aloud. 91st percentile. No indicators of impairment. Rational and self-protective. I watched the judge's face while she read, and I saw him make a small note on his legal pad. My neighbors testified. Ruth spoke about our daily conversations and my consistency of mind and humor. Barbara, Irene, and Donna spoke about the context of our kitchen cabinet meetings, about a woman who was processing a difficult family situation with clarity and community rather than confusion and isolation. Mr. Calloway from First Regional confirmed that my account management had been consistent and responsible for 11 years, that the changes I had made were appropriate protective measures consistent with someone who had identified a potential risk to their finances, and that, in his professional experience, the ability to identify and act on such a risk was a sign of sound judgment, not impaired judgment. Then I testified. Patricia walked me through the full 4 years, slowly and methodically. Every transfer, every request, every promise of repayment that never arrived, every conversation that ended with me agreeing to something I had not fully meant to agree to. She asked me to explain my decision to stop the transfers. I said that I had reviewed my financial history and concluded that the relationship had become transactional rather than familial, that I was being treated as a resource rather than a person, and that as a fully competent adult, I had the absolute right to decide how my own money was spent. Marcus's attorney tried to suggest on cross-examination that I had been coached into this position by Patricia and my neighbors. I told him that I had spent 34 years teaching other people to think for themselves and had some practice at it myself. When Judge Caldwell returned from deliberation, he spent 4 minutes explaining his findings. The evidence for cognitive decline was unsubstantiated and relied primarily on the testimony of a psychiatrist who had never examined me and a neighbor whose observations, while sincere, reflected ignorance of the underlying circumstances. The evidence for my competence was extensive, professionally documented, and consistent across multiple independent sources. The financial record clearly showed that I had been the primary financial support for the petitioners over a sustained period, and that my decision to discontinue that support, however inconvenient to them, was entirely within my legal and moral rights as an autonomous adult. The petition for guardianship was denied. He said something else before he closed. He said that the court was referring the matter of the unauthorized access to my financial documents to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal statutes. He looked directly at Marcus when he said it. I watched my son-in-law's face in the moment after. I had expected something. Anger, desperation, calculation. What I saw instead was the look of a man who had just understood, for the first time, that he had lost. Not the hearing, not just the money, something more complete than either of those things. In the hallway afterward, Claire caught up to me before I reached the exit. She touched my arm and I stopped, because she is my daughter, and because some things do not change, no matter what a courtroom has just decided. "Mom," she said. And then she couldn't find what came next. "I know," I said. "I didn't know it would go this far. I thought Marcus just had a plan. I didn't know the plan was." She stopped again. "The plan was me," I said. "The plan was always me." She nodded, and her eyes were full. "And I made the hardest decision I have made in a long time." I put my hand over hers for one moment, just one, and then I moved it away. "I love you, Claire. I will always love you. But I cannot protect you from the consequences of what has happened here, and I cannot go back to being the person I was before I understood what this was." I left her standing in the hallway of the courthouse. I did not look back, because I have read enough literature to know that looking back is how you lose your footing. 3 months later, I did something I had been promising Richard for 20 years. I drove to the Outer Banks by myself, stayed in a small cottage 3 houses from the ocean, and spent a week doing absolutely nothing useful. I walked on the beach in the mornings. I read novels I had assigned to students and never had time to actually enjoy. I sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the water turn colors as the sun went down. I spent money on a crab dinner that cost more than I would normally allow, and I ate every single bite. The house is still mine. I updated my will with Patricia before I left, and I made a donation to the North Carolina Elder Justice Coalition in an amount that would have surprised me a year ago and seems exactly right today. I have stopped apologizing for what happened because I understand now that I have nothing to apologize for. I made decisions that looked like generosity and were received as obligation. And when I stopped making them, I discovered that the affection I thought I was nurturing had been a transaction all along. I am 67 years old. I taught other people's children to read carefully, to ask whether a narrator was reliable, to look for what a story was actually saying underneath what it claimed to be saying. It took me too long to apply those same skills to my own life. I am applying them now. Richard's table is still in my kitchen. Some mornings I sit there with my coffee and I think about all the decisions that were made at it, the good ones and the ones that cost me more than I knew at the time. I do not regret the love I tried to give. I only regret that I confused giving money with giving love, and let other people confuse it too, and called that confusion family. My name is Dorothy Whitfield. I am 67 years old. I am completely alone in my house tonight, and I have never in my life felt less lonely.